Building breaks in any kind of flow state for me is almost impossible. So if I am in the hyperfocus and I am writing, I want to stay there. Like I want to stay there as long as I can to do as much as I possibly can in that. I don't always recognize the hyperfocus when I'm in it. I don't recognize the cost it's going to pull from me to expend so much energy in a compressed amount of time. Hello and welcome to Divergent Paths. I'm your host, Dr. Regina McMenemy. I am a doctor, but not that kind of doctor, and this is a podcast, not medical advice. Have you always felt a little different, but didn't know why? Have you struggled with tasks that some people seem to handle with ease? Are you mystified by social norms and interactions? Divergent Paths is a podcast for late diagnosed neurodivergent people to discuss their journeys, discovering the joys and frustrations of having a spicy brain. Each episode, I will interview someone who discovered they have ADHD, autism, or a combination of the two later in life. What defines a later in life diagnosis? Anytime the realization happens outside of the quote-unquote norm of childhood and adolescence. Everything You Wanted to Know About is a series of episodes Russ and I are starting, where we will go into greater depth about some of the unique aspects of neurospicy brains. For this episode, we discuss all things hyperfocus, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening to Divergent Paths.
We did that first episode, and there were so many topics that we gently covered.
Right.
But I feel like getting a little deeper into those would be very good for people that are listening, especially the topic of hyperfocus. So in that first episode, we talked about it and we mentioned it, and then we walked away from it. So I think we should probably have a little definition of that.
Okay. So I took a little time and looked up some official definitions because I have ideas myself about what hyperfocus is. And so the National Library of Medicine defines hyperfocus as a phenomenon that reflects one's complete absorption in a task to a point where the person appears to completely ignore or tune out everything else. It is generally reported to occur when a person has engaged in an activity that is particularly fun or interesting. And looking up the definition, I was surprised to find it's not an official signifier of ADHD. It's not something that, like, in the diagnostic criteria, they want to know that you hyperfocus. Like, that's not something to be an indication that you have ADHD. And that it is also associated with autism and, much to my surprise, schizophrenia, which I did not know was a thing.
Really interesting.
Yeah, so that was new. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew it was likely associated as well with autism because I think autism and ADHD are very closely related to each other, but I didn't know that it was also associated with schizophrenia. Yeah.
So, okay, that's the read from a book definition.
Right. Yes.
But really, like, that's not what people are feeling.
No.
That's where we want to go. What does hyperfocus feel like?
It feels like nothing else exists other than what you're focused on. Like there is nothing else in the world, and it can be intoxicating. And one of the reasons for that is what's happening in your brain is when you're hyper-focused on something, you are receiving a lot of dopamine. So you're receiving a lot of what ADHD brains struggle, not necessarily to produce dopamine, but to process it. So to get to that point, like, dopamine is what helps you get things done. So like for neurotypical people who are not, neurodiverse, when they finish a task, they get a shot of dopamine. They get like, oh, I feel good because I finished my laundry or whatever else. That's not always the case for people with neurodivergence. You don't always have that influx of dopamine from just completing something. In fact, a lot of people who have ADHD will feel nothing completing a task, even big things. Like they'll finish like their college degree and you're supposed to be like, "Yay, I did this," or whatever. Or I finished some big project and you're supposed to get this like, "Oh, yay, look at what I did." And a lot of people with ADHD will report not feeling that
Hmm.
way finishing something. And I find I like hyperfocus can very much be like a flow state where I just kind of get into it. In the first episode, I talked about like I cleaned my house one day and I didn't set out or plan to clean my house that day. It just became the hyperfocus for the day was okay, I'm doing this. And after recording that episode, one of the things that I wanted to make sure I talked about in terms of hyperfocus is like it is great when the hyperfocus is cleaning my house and that's what I need to do, right?
Hmm.
It's great. I just go from task to task. I get a bunch of things done. I feel really good. Because hyper focus in the moment can feel really good. Like while you're in it, it's great. But it is not as great when my hyper focus is on like a TV show. Like, let's say I start something and I get really engaged in that show and I want to keep watching. I just binged there's a new show on Netflix with Jeff Goldblum called Chaos. Have you seen
No, I
any?
haven't.
Anyway, it's only it's I think it's 8 episodes, but they're long episodes. They're close to they're at least over 45 minutes. They're probably all close to like 50 minutes an episode. And the cast is amazing, and the story was really it's kind of crazy and kind of off kilter, but I watched it the whole thing in a day.
Nice.
Because once I got in it, I was like, I had other things I wanted to do. It was a Saturday, and I didn't have like plans that I needed to like stop and like interrupt myself for. But so I just watched the whole thing just straight through. And that is less ideal, I think, of a hyper focus. Cause like that day I wanted to go out for a walk. It was a nice day. It was sunny. It wasn't too hot. I wanted to go for a walk. I wanted to do some other good things for myself. And I
But
didn't
you
do any of them because
right,
the hyper
because you
focus
had
took
Jeff
over.
Goldblum.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it was Jeff
Uh,
Goldblum as Zeus. He's Zeus. Like
oh, wow.
he's king of the
Okay.
gods and he's completely unhinged, which was like, yeah, anyway.
Um, I, I I can't help but wonder. So I just I'm thinking about this because I've got the whole DIY for business show. I
Mm-hmm.
I deal a lot with like the whole on the business consulting side. That's been a lot of like what I've done. I just sort of wonder like it seems like businesses are just catering to this, right? Like the whole let's bump out 100 episodes and
Mm-hmm.
because people are going to watch them.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put these really short videos on
Oh
TikTok and
God.
YouTube so people just scroll
The
and scroll.
dopamine from TikTok. Oh my God.
Right? Right? So it just
Yeah.
like it feels like it's so
Mm-hmm.
much like
Well, yeah.
out there
Yeah,
now.
it is. And our whole society has sort of moved to that sense of instant gratification, right? Like quick and easy. I mean, even with online shopping and, I've noticed in the last year or so that shopping from Amazon now it's like, "Oh, you can get this today." You know?
Right.
that and part of the problem with some of that, especially for people who struggle with dopamine uptake and struggle with neurodivergence, is those forms of dopamine that you get. Like there are different lots and lots of different ways for you to generate dopamine. When you're talking about scrolling TikTok and your or YouTube Shorts or whatever, you're getting what is kind of like shallow or cheap dopamine. Like it's quick, it's fast, and it feels really good in that
Mhm.
moment. We get the same thing from our phones in general. Every time like a notification hits on your phone, you get that oh I have a thing, right? And all of that is
Right.
cheap dopamine too. And so where it's great, and I am not going to say that I don't do this because I have a regular habit of probably scrolling TikTok for, 20 minutes or so every day before bed, which is a really bad habit. Don't do it. Um,
Yeah.
don't be
Well,
like
it
me.
just wakes you up, right? It like
Yeah.
wakes up your brain
Hmm.
and you just continue forth. Like I did that with jumping back to your Netflix thing. I did that with American Horror Story,
Mm,
right? Where it was like, it's 9 o'clock, the kids are in bed, I'm like,
right.
I'm just gonna watch this.
And then you watch
I
3
watched one
episodes and it's
episode.
midnight and
Exactly. All of a sudden it's like 2 in the morning. I mean, the I don't know if that was hyper focus or just hyper fright. I mean, I was so afraid. I'm like, I gotta watch the next one just to see if this guy lives because
right. And
am
then
I
in
gonna
a
be attacked right
cliffhanger.
now?
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, yeah. Um, I wonder on the flip side though, are there
Mhm.
tools that you use to help control the hyper focus? Is
I
there tools and technology that
I
you've
try.
seen?
Like, there are definitely ways, and I will say, um, I we talked about this a little bit in the first episode, so I do take ADHD medication now, and I take what is an extended release medication. And that provides us an like I have an even level while the medication is active in my system, I have like a standard accessible amount of dopamine. So where I was in constant like need to seek it and to control and like figure out how to access or manipulate it. I don't have as much need to do that now because I have
Mhm.
this like steady stream of dopamine that the stimulant helps provide. And I'm on a really low dose. I have always been very sensitive to stimulants, so I knew when I went to my doctor to talk to her about this, like I didn't want to. She wanted to start me on a slightly higher dose than I ended up starting on. I started on the lowest dose I could, and then I went one step up from there. So I still am on a very very low dose of this, but it has provided a consistency for me that like that get up and go, I don't have to talk myself into doing things. That was a lot of what my time was spent on, like building myself up to, okay, you're going to get up and you're going to clean the kitchen or you're going to get up and do this. Like I just get up and do things now,
Mhm.
for a good portion of the day. And it peters out. And by the end of the day, it's definitely, not at the point where it is like we're recording this at 10 o'clock in the morning. And this is prime. Like I took my medication at 7 o'clock this morning. Like by 9 o'clock, I am like, it's up, it's ready, and I can just kind of sail through most of my day because of it. When I didn't have that, I would have rituals that would get me into a similar space. For whatever reason, this time of day has always been a highly productive time for me. Like I used to joke that I'm not a morning person. I'm not an evening person. Definitely tend a little bit more toward evening these days. But I'm kind of like a midday bird or whatever. I don't know, like not an early bird, not a late bird, but like middle of the morning is my time.
Right,
So
right.
I used to structure my days so that I would put, 10 to 2 as the window for me to do as much work as I could. And when I was writing my dissertation, that was always my writing time. When I was interviewing people for my dissertation, I could do that at any time of the day because interviewing and talking to people provides me dopamine. So, like getting those activities and like recording this podcast, these are things that are already like ramping up for me. But things that require more executive function and more decision making, like writing and a different type of focus, I need to do those in like whatever that window is. So, yeah.
How do you feel on the other side of it? Like once it's done, like it's you've hyper focused on something and
Hmm.
like let's go back again to the Netflix thing because that
Hmm.
was more of like, okay, you said the cleaning thing, well that was a good thing.
Right. Yeah.
Um watching Netflix all day and not doing these other things that you could have or should have been
Hmm.
doing. How do you feel at the end of that?
In an earlier time of my life, I would have felt bad.
Okay.
I would have felt like I had wasted a day, like I had not done what I set out to do. I would be really bad about beating myself up about it. And I am more forgiving of myself now of days like that because I have a very dynamic life. I have a lot of things happening all the time, and a lot of it is out of my control, and I have to manage. And I'm not talking about like my family necessarily, like my immediate family, but I have like responsibilities to many things outside of just my immediate daily life. And it is a lot to carry a lot of the time. And I tend toward perfectionism and wanting to be quote unquote good or right or whatever. And so when I used to have days when I didn't, when my productivity was low and I felt like, oh, I didn't do as much, I used to beat myself up beat myself up a lot about it because I didn't get enough done. And now I can step back and say, I can't always control the hyperfocus. And okay, I spent a day when the stakes were low. I didn't stand anybody up. I didn't cancel plans. I didn't, drop out of doing things to drop out of doing things. I had a day where it just went a direction that I wasn't expecting it to go. And now I'm more forgiving of that. There are times when I drop out of hyperfocus, especially if I am in a project and it doesn't get finished, where I don't feel good. Like I feel like, and then I can't, hyperfocus will deplete you. Let's put it that way. Hyperfocus depletes my decision-making ability. And so when I'm done and it's gone and I'm not finished with the project in a way that I feel satisfied about it, which is one of the things like I talked about, I'll go back to the cleaning day. Like I could feel good because even if I didn't get everything done that day, I still had more done than I started out the day with, right? But like I've been working on a huge project of reorganizing my garage and sorting through a lot of stuff that I have. And I've had a lot of loss in the last 7 or 8 years. I've had 3 immediate family members die in the last 3 years. And I
Mhm.
have been in a very deep survival mode from a lot of that. And I have a lot of stuff, like a lot of stuff that came from sorting through the ends of people's lives. And this just got kind of depressing and dark, but like this is part of it. And I spent a good portion of the last few months on this garage project and my hyperfocus is not there anymore and it's not finished. And I go out in my garage now and I'm like,
So you hyper focus to a point of where now it's like, I just don't want to handle
I
this.
don't,
I just don't
yeah.
want to deal with it.
And I
And
have both. Like I can't bring myself to get back into the space to finish it right now. And it's not bad, but it's not done. And it is functional and it's more functional than it was when I started, significantly more functional than it was when I started. And it's in decent shape, but it's not done. And it isn't, I can't pull myself back to do it again. I was, going to do it a couple weekends ago. I set aside, actually, I think that was one of the things I was supposed to do on the Jeff Goldblum day.
wow. You know what you need is a TV in your garage.
I have been considering that very thing, actually.
Nice.
I just set I have a walking pad and I just set it up in front of my TV so I can walk because we're coming into, colder seasons and walking outside isn't going to be really good. Speaking of which, if you want like good resources for dopamine production, walking and physical exercise, and especially walking and being out in nature, like as cliche as it is, like hiking is really good for your brain.
Okay, so the walking's good. Even with something good like that, can you get hyper focused on that and then you're
Mhm.
just doing it too much? All of a
Yes.
sudden, instead of walking, 5 miles, you're walking 50.
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
does that even is that a concern that people should have?
I mean, you can take anything too far, right? Like, in my time researching video games, often people will ask me about like video game addiction and things like that, and my answer is always that, y- too much of anything can be
Yeah.
bad for you. And that's kind of the thing is like with your brain, you want and with your brain if you're neurodivergent, even if you're neurotypical, kind of like you want your physical diet to not be the same thing every day, right? Like you need to eat a variety of things to kind of like get a variety of nutrients, right? Your
Right.
brain needs the same thing. Your brain, you can have TikTok dopamine, like it's not, bad, but if you're only getting your dopamine from TikTok, then that's bad, right?
Right. Right.
And it's the same thing with if you do push it to, oh, I feel so good walking 2 miles. I'll walk 3, I'll walk 5, I'll walk, whatever. And if you don't train and you're not doing, weights a couple of days a week and you're not doing stretching a couple of days a week, like you're going to take and you're going to hurt your body in the ways that doing too much of one activity is going to hurt your body. So yes, there are definitely downsides to like falling into that kind of long-term hyperfocus.
Okay. So now I'm going to ask you this.
Okay.
You get into this hyper focus routine,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen this. People get into this hyper focus thing and they want to get this thing done.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I need to get this thing done.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody comes along and asks you a question,
Oh God.
asks you to take away from that hyper focus. How do you handle that?
Sometimes not well.
I asked that question as nicely as possible.
You did ask that
Interrupt me.
question as
Yeah.
nicely as
I, I,
possible.
I first thought about I should just interrupt you right in the middle of one of your answers and ask that just to drive you crazy, but I'm being nice.
Yeah, thank you for not doing that. Yeah, I mean, you can get angry. Like there are, you can get angry, you get frustrated. One of the things for me about hyperfocus is I don't always realize I'm in it when I'm in it. Like it, because it is so consuming. Like I'm not thinking about it, but when I'm interrupted, like I know it's gone. And sometimes, depending on the interruption, depending on what it is that I'm focused on, sometimes the interruption won't be a big deal and I'll just sail right back into it. But sometimes it ends it and it's gone. And that's the whole thing about like it being fleeting and the frustrating feeling of not being able to. It's not like we talked about in the first episode. It's not a switch. I don't get to just turn it on when I want it on. Like
Right.
I have to follow it when it comes. And that's one of the reasons why like I need a flexible schedule, because like even with the medication, I'll still hyper focus sometimes at like 8 o'clock at night and, need to do something and get in the state and I'm working on something and want to follow it. So
And how does it, like, thinking about like relationships or family, how does it impact those relationships?
I mean, it was hard as a mom. Like it was hard when I became a mom because like I couldn't follow it like I used
Right.
to, right? Because the demands on
You're
my
not on your
time.
schedule anymore.
No, like my time is owed to, to this person who I brought into the world and who
Right.
I am inherently responsible for. And I had the luxury of having a child later in life and, the ability to do that. And so I had a good portion of my life without, I could just always run on whatever it was. And then that becomes not a thing when you have a child. But I'd also say that once my daughter was born, it was really hard for me to hyper focus on anything else. Like she was my hyper focus until I felt like she was able to like function
Right.
more completely. And I think the fact that I became a parent not where I had family, like I don't have my blood family doesn't live near me. So like I didn't have my mom or my her dad's mom, here to be like grandparents to help kind of alleviate some of that. So it was pretty much just he and I, going through those first couple of years through toddlerhood until we got like some caregivers. And once we had a caregiver and we had somebody who could come in and like she essentially became the extension of that. And then, because I was still working through all this, then I had to be able to try to rein in my hyperfocus more so that I could work in the, 3 or 4 hours a day that I had her caregiver, so that I could, like sit down and, at the time I was teaching, sit down and grade as many papers as I could in that time.
one thing uh, I always find it awkward when I meet somebody that's about to have a kid. I always want to say, you're going to be exhausted and you're going to potentially just burn out. Like, I would love to
Absolutely.
be able to say that, but I know it's not appropriate to say that to somebody. So
And they won't believe you.
if I sent you this episode,
Uh-huh.
this is why. I know some people that are having kids, and I mean, the exhaustion is real, right? And so I would think you're hyper focused on that for a long, that
Send in, yep.
particular task. I'm
Mhm.
gonna instead though make this about like your dissertation,
Okay.
right? Like that is a long
That was a long,
process.
yep.
There is an end date to that.
Mhm.
Yeah, like like you got to have
In
it done
theory,
by
at
this
least.
time. It's got to be
Right,
done. It's
yeah.
got to be ready. So let's talk about that one instead on
Okay.
this. But the exhaustion, is it happening throughout? Is that like a pitfall that's happening
Mhm.
throughout the entire process? Like you're just dealing with cycles
Mhm.
of, man, I worked 12 hours on
Yep.
this. The next day you're just exhausted.
Yeah,
And
and
then
the next day you
you're
don't
like, I got to
function.
get back into this and
Mhm.
kind of finish it. So you work
Mhm.
another 12 hours. So is that happening? Is that cycle happening the entire
Yeah.
time?
Yeah, that's happening the entire time. And in reflection, I would have to go back and think a little bit more, but like the day that I binged the show, I might have actually been in burnout and not been thinking about the fact that I was in burnout, you know?
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that I had and that I needed it. And so that's also the reason why I'm a little kinder to myself about these than I like when those days happen, because I don't always recognize the hyper focus when I'm in it. I don't recognize the cost it's going to pull from me to expend so much energy in a compressed amount of time, and to allow myself, like, building breaks in any kind of flow state for me is almost impossible. So if I am in the
Mm.
hyper focus and I am writing and, like, you know, in that, I want to stay there. Like, I want to stay there as long as I can to do as much as I possibly can in that. And I will not we said this in the first episode, like, is it, hyper goal oriented, or you hyper focused, and it's like those are not the same things. Like, I shut down. I don't recognize that I'm hungry. I don't recognize that I haven't gotten up from my desk, and some of the things I have done to compensate that is, like, it's silly, but like my Apple Watch that tells me you haven't stood up in an hour, stand up. Like, I get
Yeah.
mad sometimes because if I'm in a hyper focus and I want to stay in it, I don't want to stand up, and I just do the thing you ever see people do with their watches where they, like, wave their arms so that they get their stand thing so it goes away, right? Like, I still do that. But I will also kind of log, okay, you don't have much more time left here. Like, you need to take care of your body too. And, oh, it's
Mhm.
11:50 and it's doing this and you haven't eaten since 8 o'clock in the morning. You need to, like, check in with your body and, do that interoception where you're like, okay, I'm going to be hangry pretty soon, so I should probably eat, you know at certain
Right.
times in my life, on certain important days, I have assigned people the task of making sure I eat. So, like, on my graduation day, it was Iris's dad's responsibility when I graduated my PhD to make sure I ate something before we went to the venue for the graduation, like, to make sure I was fed, because it was a long graduation. It was going to be hours I was going to be sitting there or whatever. Like, make sure I eat something because I will forget and I will go through it and then
Right.
I'll be, like, falling apart at the end because I'll be so hungry.
So, okay, you mentioned the hyper goals
Yeah.
and, like doing what you did, right,
Mm-hmm.
to get to that point. Like you needed to be focused.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say hyper focused. You needed to
Right.
be focused. You
Yeah.
needed to like set goals. You needed to make stuff happen. You needed to,
Mm-hmm.
and I think of let's say, the athletes, right?
Right.
Like athletes. You look at some of these people that were like at the Olympics, and it's like, how how do they have that body and I've got this one? Like,
Right.
what is happening here? At least that's what I do. But it's because of the constant training, and it's getting up at 5 a.m. and
Mm-hmm.
going to the gym and doing whatever practice that they need to do to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's living their life for a few hours and then going to the gym again
Right.
and doing some other workout thing and then living their life for a few more hours and then doing it again and then just repeating the next day.
Right.
So there's that thing of like, just the drive to be like just focused on something. And some will
Mm-hmm.
call that like it's hyper focused on one thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they're a specialist at something. We could use the same thing for, business, right? There are
Mm-hmm.
people that are just specific to taxes. Like they love
Right.
doing taxes.
Exactly.
I hate it. I don't
Right.
get it, but I, whatever.
Oh,
Like
I know.
I hire people for that.
Right. My my
To
my
do that.
finance guy, the guy who does like my financial advisor, 100% ADHD, but
Yeah.
loves this is his special interest. Like this is the
Right.
thing that
It's
he loves and that has persisted for him, that he's like, I love it. He's like, I can sit, and I'm like, I am so glad, because like you do good things with my money, and thank you. I don't
right.
have a lot of money, so like the fact that you can help me make it more than it was is just amazing. Thank
Right.
you. And I'm so
So
glad
how
that
do you tell the
that's,
difference though?
well, I
How's the
mean,
difference?
for him, that is like, that still is his ADHD. It's just ADHD and math. And I would actually pose to you that I think a high number of people that you're talking with and you're working with in your business are entrepreneurs, right?
You're
Are
right.
people who've
Right.
started their own business.
Yep.
The like percentage of people who are neurodiverse, who are entrepreneurs, is really high,
Yeah.
because it allows for it accommodates entrepreneurship, accommodates neurodivergence.
Right.
It
Right.
allows for
You're on your
this.
own schedule. You're yeah.
You
Yeah.
can you work on your own schedule, you set your own goals, you're your own boss, you're not dealing with somebody telling you what to do, and your brain just, because like, I used to think that like my brother's rebellion against everything anybody ever told them to do was them just being jerks. And I won't say that they're not jerks, because they're jerks sometimes. We're all jerks sometimes.
And they're not listening. So
And
that makes
they're
them a jerk as
definitely
well.
not listening. There's no chance. But like, that rebellion, like I didn't recognize that I was the same way until one of my brothers like said to me, I when I was in the hyperfocus over my daughter, and my mom died when my daughter was a year and a half old, and so like that was a really hard time, because like then that's part of where, like I talked about those other responsibilities I had, a lot of that started while she was very young, and I was grieving at the same time, so like it was a very messy thing. But I said, I would tell people that my daughter has been a child of her own mind since she was born, and she was stubborn in some very interesting ways. She would not be spoon fed. I could not spoon feed her. She would not eat from a spoon. She wanted to feed herself. And
Mm,
so I had to learn what baby led weaning was, because like I had to figure out a way to feed her that she would eat, right?
right. Right.
And she wanted nothing more than to get up and walk around. Like she wanted to walk. She wanted to sit. She wanted to walk. She was very physical from the very beginning. And like I am not like I can dance, and I've got like, you know, some things I'm really good at physically, but I'm not a particularly athletic person. So to have a child that was like, I need to move, was, a certain type of fascination too. So
Um okay, so you put me down this entrepreneurship
yeah,
path. So I've got to go there.
yeah,
You okay, so it was baby led, as you
yes,
said.
yes.
So for an entrepreneur that's hiring people, that's bringing people in and
Mhm.
dealing with a team, is this like how do you work with that? Like what's your advice on that?
Well, I guess my biggest piece of advice would be to recognize like people's strengths, and to recognize it's not going to be one size fits all, right?
Hmm.
Like the strategies that work for some people with ADHD and autism and neurodivergence, it don't always work And in addition to that, like some of the things that have worked for me as strategies to manage my ADHD and accommodations I made for myself have not persisted in my life. And I'll swing back to the dissertation. So I use something writing my dissertation that's called the Pomo-Doro method. Have you ever heard of this?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I've used that as well.
Yes. So my entire dissertation was written using the Pomodoro method, where I would write and I would take a break, and I would write and I would take a break. And in my head, like, because it's Pomodoro is tomato, right? Because the person who invented it used a tomato timer when
Right.
they invented it, right? And so my metaphor for my dissertation was I was making salsa because I was crushing tomatoes, and, you know, Chris would come home from work and he'd be like, how many tomatoes did you crush today? And this would be like our conversation. And it would be like, on a day when I crushed 6, it would be like, oh, that's fantastic. You did so much. That's so good. On a day when it was more like 2, he's like, okay, so what was going on? And I'm like, well, I had this happening and this, and I got interrupted with this and that. And like, we could kind of break through it more. So.
Right. We actually, at the company I work for, one of our developers built out their own Pomodoro timer. It's available.
Yeah.
Maybe we should even include that as a link in here because it's
Yeah.
really cool because
Yeah.
it doesn't have, most Pomodoros have that like bell at the end or
Yeah.
like disturbing noise at the end.
Yeah.
This one doesn't. And
Nice.
he built out the whole thing because he just wanted something subtle in the background happening
Mm-hmm.
so that he doesn't have to
Yeah. I hated the bell.
deal with the big interruption. Yeah. The
At the
bell
time I was
stinks.
working on my dissertation, I had an extension for my browser that would not let me go to like Facebook or whatever when I was in a Pomodoro, when I was in a
Mm-hmm.
round of, a Pomodoro. There was a word for it. I can't think what.
I, I don't know what that's
I don't
called, but yeah,
remember like
session.
a
I don't know.
session. Yeah. When I was
Go
in
with
it,
that.
when I turned it on and I was, whatever it was 25 and 5 minutes. I have never been able to use a Pomodoro method since.
Really?
I've never used it since my dissertation. I have not used it since that time. It was the thing I used then, and I have not gotten back to using it. I know it would still work. Like, I don't think it would be ineffective, but I've just never been able to get back to using it the same way that I did for the dissertation. And that's the other thing I would say is like recognize that accommodations don't always persist, right? They don't always carry through for you. So like you might have an
Mm-hmm.
accommodation that works for a while and you might change. An example for me of that is I redo my closet, my clothes closet, like probably once a year. I will reorganize how my clothes are organized, because like something will work for a while and then I will get annoyed with it for whatever reason. Like I don't always know why, but like for a long time I had these black bins that I had like my t-shirts and stuff in, and then I realized that I was only wearing like the top t-shirts, right, the top 3 or 4, because they were the ones that were on the top of the dark bin. And I didn't know at this time that I had ADHD. Now I understand I have ADHD. I recently got rid of my dresser entirely. I no longer have a dresser with closed
Mm.
drawers with clothes in it because I would forget that those clothes existed.
Mm.
Like they just
Right.
didn't exist anymore. They were they were out of sight or whatever. So my current closet setup, I can walk into my very, very small walk-in closet. It's so tiny. And I can stand in one place and I can see every type of clothing I can wear. Everything is visible. And all my shoes are right there. All like everything is like I can walk in and I can see it. And I still need to pull it out every now and then and like rotate the shirts through because I will do that same thing where I'll just wear the top few that I keep washing. So I do have to like pull it out and like kind of like kind of jigger them, but I can stand in one place in my closet, see everything. There's a chair in there for me to sit down and put my shoes on. So like everything is just perfectly visible. And when I had my dresser, it sat outside my closet and I had like, t-shirts and leggings in like a couple of the drawers. And I would forget and I would open the drawer and I'd be like, oh, that's right. You bought these new leggings for working out, but you haven't worn them because I couldn't see them and they didn't
Right.
exist for me. And then on top of that, the top of the dresser became this place where I just collected stuff. It never functioned in any way for me other than I would put stuff there and I would forget that it existed, even though I could see it.
Right.
Forget that it existed, and it just became this big pile of like a collection of stuff of what I call like the unmade, what they call clutter, unmade decisions, right? So it would become a collection of unmade decisions. And I realized that the dresser wasn't functioning for me in that I would forget the clothes were in there. And on top of it became this doom pile of just stuff I didn't organize or put away where it was supposed to be put away. And my visual editing goes as such. I will not see something. Like my desk is still a mess right now. Like if you look down from where we are on camera, this is not a video podcast, but Russ and I can see each other as we talk. If you saw this, my desk is kind of a mess. I don't see it until it's all I can see. And then the hyperfocus will often turn on to, I have to clean this up and I have to clean this up today because I can't handle it looking this way anymore. And so I have tried to cut those places out of my life where I don't have like just these random places to put things that they collect.
So I'm sort of I don't know, I'm like a minimalist.
That's where I'm
Like
trying to get to.
anything around me just bugs me. I just want to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like how many times have you seen me in a black t-shirt? Like that's all I wear.
Almost every day. Almost
I just want to
for
make life
30 years.
easier. Like I don't care about those decisions. I just want to,
Mm-hmm. Well,
I don't know. I think mine is about ease.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I did some of that too, where like the biggest thing about laundry that frustrates me are socks. Like every
Ugh,
time I see like a
yeah.
picture of someone who has a family with a lot of children, the first thought I have is, "Oh my god, that is so many socks." Like it's awful, but it's true. Like that is so many socks. How do you deal with so many socks? And so what I did for myself I did a similar thing. I always wear black shoes. Like I like black. This is like a persistent thing. You probably remember when I was not really emo, but a little emo in high school. And
Right.
I had like a black leather jacket I wore all the time and a black backpack and, black shoes have just been my thing. So a few years ago, again, this was pre-diagnosis, an accommodation I made for myself was I just went and I bought the same black socks and I just have an open bin of black socks and they're all the same. So
Nice.
like it
That
doesn't
makes it
matter.
easy.
I just reach in and grab 2 socks and that's the end of it. I was in a job interview and they had sent us the questions ahead of time, which was great, but they had one question that they saved for the end that they wanted to get kind of like a real reaction for. And the question was, how do you organize your sock drawer? And I said, I don't have a sock drawer. And the looks on their faces. I said, I have a sock bin. And I described this exact thing where like I know the function that socks need to have. Why am I making it hard for myself that I have all of these socks? And there's a whole nother episode that we can do about
Your
clutter
socks. Oh,
and stuff about socks. Sure, we can be the sock episode about like the way some neurodivergent brains want to hold on to things. Because at that time when I was going through the socks I had kept a pair of socks for years that I never wore because they were uncomfortable. But I had literally kept them because they were like cashmere. So they were like these nice socks and I had kept them. And I never wore them, but I kept them because somewhere in my mind, because they were cashmere and they were nice socks, I needed to keep them. Even though they didn't serve any purpose.
You just had to have them.
I just felt like I couldn't get rid of them because they were nice socks.
Right.
Like, let's think about that for a second.
Right.
And how much I had moved in a good portion of my life. I moved back and forth across the country a couple of times. I lived many places in different places. Like I moved a lot and I carried
Right.
these socks around for years until I was like, what am I doing? Why do I have these socks? If I don't wear them and I'm not going to.
Right. Right.
How did
You
we
may
get to
have just
socks
titled
from
this episode.
Hyperfocus? What?
You may have just titled this episode. I don't know.
Possibly.
Okay, so we're heading up towards the end of this episode. You talked about a lot of different things. We went, through this whole hyper focus. I
Yep.
tried to, not hyper focus on just one question.
Right.
We talked about a lot of
We
different
definitely
things.
there was a very nice feel of ADHD here, where it stayed reasonably controlled, but we still wandered.
Maybe that's what you should do at the end of each one of your episodes, is just kind of figure out, like, what was the ADHD score of this
Right.
episode? Did you stay
Right.
on
How do we
track?
rank this?
But okay, so jumping back to earlier, like with society, like kind of almost accommodating this with like the scrolly stuff and the binge watching and all of these different things that are out there
Well, I
now.
would say
Like,
capitalizing on it.
exactly, they've capitalized on it.
Yes, on the cheap dopamine.
How
Yeah.
do we, how do we like not think like, oh, you know what, we have to adapt to this. We have
Hmm.
like, this is bad. Me doing this is bad. This is wrong. This is not the
Right.
way, things
Right.
go. I shouldn't be binge watching. I shouldn't be doing this thing. Like, how do you like make yourself feel good about this and okay with this and just accept this?
I think a healthy dose of self-forgiveness is really important in this, and to recognize that you can't always control it. And I keep coming back to that, but like, and maybe it's just my own garbage in this, my own baggage of feeling like I should be able to have that switch, and I should be able to point my laser focus and my hyper focus at whatever it is I want to point it at that day. But I think just being able to step back and recognize that it's okay to rest. And sometimes, like, what if it's a resting hyper focus? What if that's what, watching Chaos with Jeff Goldblum, like, they should be sponsoring me.
You should be.
You know, what if it was a hyper focus of rest? Like, and what if you needed, like, it, let's say you hyper focus on reading a book. Like, what if you needed to just sit and like let that be what it was, instead of feeling this need to constantly be productive, to constantly do something, to use your time wisely. Like, all of this stuff that we carry, and all of this garbage and all of these beliefs that like we have to run ragged and do and produce and be and all of that. What if we can just step back from it and say, it's okay that this was my hyper focus today, and that's all right. Tomorrow's another day. There's always a possibility for it to be something else then.
All right. Well, we've got more topics. Hopefully you'll let me come back and we can chat more.
I will. This is going to be a regular segment where Russ and I sort of dive into some of these things about neurodivergence and some of these big topics that I really am hoping that the interviews, I want to make sure stories are heard, but I would like them to be listened to by people who don't have neurodivergence, or maybe love somebody who does.
Right.
So that maybe they'll have a little empathy and understanding as well. Thank you so much for listening. Do you experience hyperfocus? Do you relate to some of the stories we shared in this episode? Does someone in your life experience hyperfocus and some of the things we experienced in this episode? Let us know on Instagram at Divergent Paths Consulting what hyperfocus is like for you or the people in your life. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, like and leave a review, and share with your spicy-brained friends. And until next time, stay spicy.